in this video we'll be looking at evolutionary trends provided by the anatomical features of fossils, and the fossils that we'll be looking at is Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, and then Homo. And then the first question that I know you'll ask, because that's what my students always ask, is, ma'am, do we need to be able to spell this? And yes, you do. You need to be able to spell it. Obviously, you're not going to be penalized if there's one or two letters that are out of place, but at least we need to be able to see that it is Ardipithecus that you're talking about and it is Australopithecus that you're speaking of. So get those words down. So what we'll be looking at with these three ones is we'll be looking at the age of each fossil found, or the timeline for the existence of these three genera. Then we'll also be looking at the fossil sites where they were found, with specific emphasis on the fossil sites that form part of the Cradle of Humankind, and then the scientists that discovered them. So here, pay special attention to the ones that were found at the Cradle of Humankind, and that is in South Africa for those of you that don't know. Now, the following three ones that we'll look at, like I mentioned before, is Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, and then Homo. Now, just breaking down these names, you don't need to know this, but I just find that once you connect something to it, sometimes it becomes easier to remember how to spell them. So Ardi actually means ground or floor, and then Pithecus means ape. So this is because it was probably the first, they thought that this was the first human-like ape that was around. And then Australo means southern, and then Pithecus, ape, obviously Australopithecus, the southern ape. We'll get to that. And then the genus Homo, well, you know that. So Ardipithecus, and then the specific one here, Ardipithecus ramidus, and here we can break down this word rami, and that actually means root. So the ground ape root, if you want to call it like that. And they've actually just nicknamed this guy over here. So this is what Ardipithecus ramidus looked like, and they've nicknamed him Ardi. So the time of existence here is 5.8 to 4.4 million years ago, and it was found in Ethiopia in 1993. So that's East Africa, and it was discovered by Tim White. Now, once again, they did say with specific emphasis on the ones that were found in the Cradle of Humankind. But if you have space in your memory, maybe just try and remember this just for the sake of it. So the characteristics, remember, we are going to look at, so if we scroll up, they specifically talk about the anatomical features of these fossils. And we did this in part 1 of human evolution. So the anatomical features that they are referring to here is brain size, dentition, if there's a cranial, the size of the cranial or brow ridges, if those are present, palate shape, what else is there? Prognatism, sorry, always struggle with that word. And then if they were bipedal, and with that we look at specifically the shape of the spine. We look at pelvis shape. So if it's wide and narrow, as we would get in the Homo species, or if it's wide and broad with the Homo, or long and narrow as with the apes. And then the other one that we look at here is the foramen magnum position. So if you have a skull, if it's more to the back, then that would probably mean that it was quadrupedal, or that it was not fully in an upright bipedal position, whereas with humans, the foramen magnum position has moved to a more central position, so that the vertebral column comes right in underneath the skull. So getting back to Ardi, so characteristics here, most likely bipedal. So that means that if they looked at the pelvis shape, if they looked at the foramen magnum position, and if they looked at the shape of the spine, they could basically tell if it was bipedal or not. So this one most likely was able to walk upright, but not in a fully erect position. So the foramen magnum position was more forward than in apes. So like I said, with apes it will be quite to the back, so this one might have just been a bit to the front, and then with Homo genus it will be more centrally located. So the pelvis is wider at the top and narrow and long at the bottom as an ape. So here we've got a pelvis that is similar to that of Homo, and then we've also got the other half that is similar to that of apes. Now they had long arms, almost as long as their legs, for climbing trees, and they had opposable grasping big toe as an ape, so the foot was not human-like yet. They had a small brain capacity of approximately 300 to 350 cubic centimeters. They had ape-like teeth but smaller canines and molars. The diastema was present, so that is that gap. I'm not going to draw it because it's going to be horrible, but the gap between the incisors and the canines. Remember from part 1, in humans that is completely absent. They had prognatism, it was present, so they had a sloped face. The palate was rectangular, so in humans, remember, the palate is wide, and then in the intermediate ones it almost has like a U shape with them in the apes. So it was rectangular in them, and they had small brow ridges, but you can see there's the brow ridges present, so it was visible. So that is Ardipithecus, and now we are moving on to Australopithecus, the ape man. So they believe that this could have been a possible transitional species from ape to human. The time of existence here, 4.5 to 1.4 million years ago. The fossil site here is Eastern and Southern Africa, and there's quite a few Australopithecines that we'll be looking at, specifically the ones that were found in Southern Africa. And I think there might be a problem here with the discovered by, because there's quite a few scientists, so just scratch this one. The characteristics here, they were bipedal and upright. The foramen magnum position was more forward at the base of the skull, so obviously that is, they were more upright than Ardipithecus. The pelvis was short and wide, and that is another reason why. They still had long arms for climbing. The fingers are long, and they had a non-opposable big toe, so this foot was more human-like already. Brain capacity a bit bigger. They had smaller canines than apes, but bigger than humans still, so that makes them not human. And then they had a protruding jaw without a chin, so we have prognatism that is present. Sloped face, the palate was U-shaped, and then they had large brow ridges. Now the 5 well-known Australopithecines, and these are the ones that you kind of need to know because they were discovered in the Cradle of Humankind region. So the Taung Child, Mrs. Pless, Lucy, Littlefoot, and Australopithecus Sidiba. Now moving on to the Taung Child. So the Taung Child was Australopithecus africanus, and you need to know the time of existence, so 2 to 3 million years ago. The fossil site was northwest of Kimberley, so this was in southern Africa, and the archaeologist that discovered it was Professor Raymond Dart in 1924. Now the characteristics, it was a skull of a child. They presume it was about 3 to 4 years old. It had ape and human features. The brain capacity is similar to that of apes, with 340 cubic centimeters. Just remember that it is written like that on this program. I cannot do that. And then it had small teeth, which was very human-like, and the foramen magnum was forward, so it was bipedal. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit about the Taung Child because I find the story quite interesting. So this is a reconstruction of the skull that they had found, and they actually believed that it was caught by a large eagle. And the reason that they believed that was, if you look at this diagram here at the bottom, is because of claw marks that they found in the skull, specifically in the eye sockets and pieces of the skull that they had found. So they believed that an eagle caught it and then flew with it to its nest, and then put it in its nest to eat, and some of the bones then later fell out. And it's not inconceivable that this could have happened because you get major or not major, but very large eagles, such as the Marshall eagle, that are known to catch small impala or even baboons sometimes. So it is possible that it could have caught the Taung Child. So this is what they believed the Taung Child looked like, and then this is Professor Raymond Dart with the skull of the Taung Child. Quite an interesting story. Next is Mrs. Pless, also Australopithecus africanus, lived, or the time of existence, 2 to 3 million years ago. Now this one forms part of the Cradle of Humankind because it was found in the Sterkfontein caves in South Africa, and it was discovered by Dr. Robert Broom in 1947. This is him over here. And the characteristics here: a non-protruding canines, diet mainly of plant material. So this is a reconstruction of Mrs. Pless. This is the skull. I think this is actually a cast of that skull of Mrs. Pless. Now, Mrs. Pless, if you ever do visit the Sterkfontein caves, there's quite an interesting story. So there were Italian miners that were mining lime in the area, and they actually stuck in dynamite and tried to open up the one cave, and that's when they exposed the skull of Mrs. Pless, because they blew it into all different directions, the rest of the remains. But in any case, so they thought that Mrs. Pless, based on the size, was a Mrs., but it turns out that Mrs. Pless was actually a Mr. It was a very young male. And I think they found that based off of the wisdom teeth that was still coming out. So that's a little interesting story there as well. Next is Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. Now, time of existence, 3.5 million years ago. The fossil site is in Adar in the Afar Valley in Ethiopia, discovered by Donald Johnson in 1974. Characteristics here: shape of the pelvis was female, bipedal, small, 1 meter in length, that's very tiny, a low forehead, flat nose, protruding lower jaw and large canines, long arms and short legs, and also still a fairly small brain capacity. So this is a reconstruction of Lucy, and then also what they do believe Australopithecus afarensis looked like on the right hand side. Next one is Littlefoot. They're not sure about the species, but they do know it's an Australopithecine, so Australopithecus genus. Time of existence, 3.7 million years ago. Also forms part of the Cradle of Humankind, the Sterkfontein caves, discovered by Dr. Ron Clark in 1994. And the reason they called it Littlefoot is because initially they only found the ankle and foot bones. So the complete skeleton was revealed only in 2018. That's how long it took for them to fully excavate Littlefoot. So the characteristics here: most complete and oldest fossil hominin ever discovered. This has since changed. I'll tell you a bit about it when we get to Australopithecus Sidiba. And then the bipedal, it's bipedal because the foramen magnum is more forward, short arms and small hands, and then a small brain. So this is the complete skeleton that they had then found, and that is Dr. Ron Clark busy with the excavation, and then obviously a reconstruction of Littlefoot. So this then brings us to Australopithecus Sidiba, time of existence 1.7 to 2 million years ago, and this also forms part of the Cradle of Humankind, specifically in the Malapa area, so you do need to know this. It was discovered by Professor Lee Berger and his son Matthew in 2008, and he's a professor at the University of Wits, and the characteristics here is it has long arms and short hands, bipedal, large brow ridges, small brain, but more advanced than other Australopithecines, and two fossils were found, those of a young woman and a boy, and if I recall correctly, the one's name is Garabo, and that is Australopithecus Sidiba, and then a reconstruction of Australopithecus Sidiba. And also, she's not posing, it's just the way that they posed her, because I know some of my students asked that in class as well. Now, why I was saying that Littlefoot up here, the complete skeleton was revealed, and they say it's the most complete and oldest fossil hominin ever discovered. I'm just speaking under correction, but I think Homo naledi, that was later discovered by Professor Lee Berger because they were working on the Australopithecus Sidiba site, is now the most complete hominin ever discovered. Speaking under correction, but I'll in the description at the bottom of this video, I'll put in 3 YouTube links that National Geographic made with the discovery of Homo naledi. You do not need to know Homo naledi, but it's a very interesting 3-part video to watch. And in the beginning, they talk about his discovery of Australopithecus Sidiba, how his son came across that. Next, we're moving on to the genus Homo. So they first appeared in Africa around 2.2 million years ago. Characteristics here: bipedal and upright walkers, a forward foramen magnum position at the base of the skull, so directly above the vertebral column. The pelvis was short and wide. The legs are long in relation to arms, non-opposable big toe, enlarged heel bone, opposable thumb, larger brain, smaller teeth, so no protruding canines, no gap between the canines and the incisors, jaws that were rounded with a prominent chin, flat face, wide curved palate, no brow ridges, and the older species have large brow ridges such as Homo neanderthalensis. Now the 4 Homo species that you need to know about is Homo habilis, the handyman, Homo erectus, and then Homo neanderthalensis, and then lastly Homo sapiens. So Homo Abilis, known as the handyman, was around the time of 2.2 to 1.6 million years ago. The fossil site is in Tanzania in Africa, and it was discovered by Lewis and Mary Leakey in 1960. So this is Lewis and Mary Leakey down here, 2 very influential archaeologists that opened up quite a lot to the world of archaeology. So Homo habilis had a larger brain, it was bipedal, and it was believed to be the first group to make tools. So this is a reconstruction, and then this is just a nice image to show what life would have been like and how they were using tools to skin and hunt animals with. Then Homo erectus, the upright man, so they believe the first fully bipedal human genus. So the time of existence here, 1.8 to 0.3 million years ago. Fossil site in Kenya, so in Africa, and probably the first to migrate to Europe and Asia. And it was discovered in 1980, specifically the Turkana boy, and it was just a small fragment of a skull that I don't think anybody would have been able to have seen except for Kamoya Kimeu. I think I'm pronouncing his surname incorrectly, but it was amazing that he even found that piece of skull. So the characteristic here: large bodies, bipedal, they had pronounced brow ridges, as you can see, large jaws and teeth, as you can also see there. They had a larger brain capacity, so around 1,000 cubic centimeters. They used stone and bone tools. They also were able to use fire, and they were great hunters. Then Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, got their name from the Neander Valley in Germany, where the first fossil was found in 1856. Now they lived around 230,000 to 30,000 years ago. They lived in Europe and Western Asia. The characteristics here: they had long and flat skulls, bipedal. They still had pronounced brow ridges, as you can see. They had a broad nose, large brains, larger brains than Homo sapiens, but language was not that well developed in them. They used stone and bone tools. They used fires. They were great hunters. They wore clothes, and they buried their dead, which is emotive behavior or spiritual behavior, which shows complex thought. So you can see that they had quite broad bodies, and they were not that tall. They were quite stocky, and they believed that that was that way because they lived in these colder regions. And they actually believed that Homo neanderthalensis and then Homo sapiens actually interbred at some point, and that is why some people actually do have a little bit of Neanderthal genes in their genetics, which is quite interesting. And then Homo sapiens, the time of existence here was 200,000 years ago to present. Characteristics here, they caused the disappearance of the Neanderthals. They had better skills, advanced tool use. They used spears, arrows, bows, and hooks for fishing. They wore clothes, lived in communities, hunters, developed agriculture and domesticated animals. They wore jewelry, had cave art, buried their dead, larger brains, and they were able to shape the environment to suit them. And then just looking here again at the interpretation of a phylogenetic tree proposed by different scientists, showing the possible evolutionary relationships as it applies to the hominid evolution. So looking at this is a timeline that they can give you showing millions of years ago. So you've got present, and then you go back in time. So just make sure that you do check which way the timeline is going. I've made this mistake myself plenty of times by not checking which way it goes, and then you make a mess of it. So what they can ask you here, for example, is which Homo species was alive during the time that Australopithecus Sidiba was. So the timeline that Australopithecus Sidiba was alive, I'm coloring it in red, was there. So what you would then do is you can take your ruler and just draw a line down. So this means that during this time, whichever species or genus crosses it with it was alive at the same time. Now remember, the question said which Homo species was alive at the same time as Australopithecus Sidiba. So then that would be Homo rudolfensis, because it's that portion there. Homo Abilis was as well, Homo Erectus, and then the others are Australopithecines, so they don't count. And then Homo naledi here at the base as well. Then the out of Africa hypothesis. So what do you need to know here? You need to know the evidence for the out of Africa hypothesis. So fossil evidence here, specifically with Ardipithecus. Ardipithecus fossils that were only found in Africa supports this hypothesis. Australopithecus, the fossils were found only in Africa, including Karabo, Littlefoot, Taung Child, and Mrs. Pless. Then Homo fossils, fossils of Homo Abilis only found in Africa. The oldest fossils of Homo Erectus were found in Africa. Remember, Homo Erectus were the ones that were able to move out of Africa, and then while the younger fossils were found in other parts of the world. So that these all support the out of Africa hypothesis combined with genetic evidence, which is mitochondrial DNA, which we spoke about in the previous video. Then the timeline of the existence of different species of the genus Homo we just did before we scrolled over to this side. So what is the out of Africa hypothesis? It says that all modern humans, or Homo sapiens, originated in Africa about 200,000 years ago and migrated to other parts of the world about 50,000 years ago. And then you've got this evidence that supports it. So Homo sapiens were better adapted to adapt to different environments, and were able to outcompete any other Homo species such as Homo neanderthalensis and Erectus, and the following evidence is used to support the hypothesis. So the genetic evidence, so the oldest mitochondrial DNA with the most variation is found in Africa, and then the fossil evidence here of hominins found in Africa, Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, and then the Homo genus, and then cultural evidence, so the oldest artifacts are found in Africa. So that all supports the out of Africa hypothesis, as well as with the genetic evidence that we spoke about, the mitochondrial DNA. So with the mitochondrial DNA, it is only transferred from a mother to her offspring, so all the the more mutations, so thus there's more variation. And then the studies have shown that the highest levels of genetic variation occur in human populations of Africa. So there's the greatest variation found in African populations. So they believe they migrated out of Africa and then went and populated the rest of the world. And then the fossil evidence, like we mentioned above, Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, and Homo Abilis fossils were only found in Africa. Africa is the continent with the largest number of hominin fossils. Africa is the oldest fossils of Homo erectus and Homo sapiens, and there are two main regions in Africa where the most hominins have been found, and that is the Great Rift Valley in East Africa, so that is Kenya, Tanzania, and Ethiopia, and then also the Cradle of Humankind in South Africa. And then just to show you where the Cradle of Humankind is, it's in Gauteng, and it sits right over there on the border of the Northwest province. So here's an enlargement of that little area there. So this is the Cradle of Humankind. You've got the Sterkfontein caves where Mrs. Pless and Littlefoot were found. Then you've got Malapa where Australopithecus Sidiba was found. And then there's some other fossil sites. So Marupeng, this area over here. If you ever have time over the holidays and you want to go do something, ask your parents if they can take you to Marupeng and the Sterkfontein caves. You can do a little combination to it. It's very interesting and it's a lot of fun. Now the name Cradle of Humankind reflects the fact that the site has produced a large number of, as well as some of the oldest hominin fossils ever found, some dating back 3.5 million years ago. Then just to show you the Great Rift Valley, so it's in East Africa, and this basically is what it looks like. And the reason that they find so many fossils there is that area is very rich in water, and that would have obviously attracted all sorts of animals and then these early hominin beings, and then they got deposited, or they got buried over time, and as this rift enlarges, they get exposed, and then these archaeologists find them. And then just another two examples of reading these phylogenetic diagrams. So firstly, this is from a previous exam paper, so there's use of fire and use of stone tools. So this is the bar and timeline of which this would have occurred. So they can ask you which of the Homo species were using stone tools, so then it would be all the Homo species that fall into this area here. So that would be Homo rudolfensis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. So those were all the ones that used stone tools, and then if they ask you which ones used fire, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, because they fall in that time period. Hope that makes sense. So just check, millions of years ago, you've got present, and then you go back in time. This one as well, you've got present at the top here, and then you go back in time this way. So like I said, just make sure you read it properly. So here they could ask which Homo species was alive at the same time as Homo sapiens. So then you just draw a line and see, and that would be Homo neanderthalensis, for example. And that's the end of this video. I hope it was helpful.